Hey, it's Alex with Lover Fighter Writer, and welcome to the three worst digital marketing fails of 2023 so far. Now that we are officially a little over halfway through 2023, I wanted to look back on some of the biggest digital marketing failures of 2023. Now, I do a lot of analysis of marketing strategies and tactics, both on my own time when I'm just looking at businesses that I might be interested in working with, or considering new strategies for my own business, or even just for fun sometimes. But normally I look at positive examples, especially when I'm making videos for this channel. And I also typically look at smaller businesses, not necessarily small businesses, sometimes small businesses, but businesses or corporations with like less than 50 employees in most cases, because that is most of my client base. I have worked with some larger corporations, but for the most part, I'm not working with like massive businesses like the ones that we're going to be looking at today. So these are the three worst digital marketing fails of 2023, and they are all widely regarded by the vast majority of people as large failures, and they were all perpetuated by enormous corporate brands who really should have known better. And so we're going to take a look at some of the things that they did wrong. We're going to take a look at maybe why they made the moves that they made, why those moves didn't work, and we're going to try and take away at least one lesson from each of these examples. So without further ado, let's get into it. I did see some people saying that there was nothing wrong with the M&M's Super Bowl commercial, and in its defense, I didn't watch it. The only professional sports that I pay attention to are combat sports like mixed martial arts, so I don't watch the Super Bowl, and I'm also really not aware of modern popular culture or what brands like M&M's are doing, so I wasn't really aware of any of this before I started researching some of the biggest marketing fails of 2023. But to my understanding, this issue actually kind of started before the Super Bowl ad. And for as long as I can remember, like since I was a little kid, when I used to watch TV and see M&M's commercials, they've always had these anthropomorphized M&M characters who are like these cartoon M&M candies that talk and they do funny sketches, and they used those for a lot of their commercials, probably a lot of their most successful commercials, because now, which is like probably 20 years after the ads that I'm remembering, they're still using those characters, or at least they were up until recently. And I'm not sure what the reason was, but I did read that they recently announced that they were going to stop using those M&M's characters. I think they called them spokes candies. And I think there was some sort of a political controversy around the issue. And so they announced that they were going to stop using them. They stopped using them. And then they did this Super Bowl commercial using this fairly popular actress, I think. And from what I read, it seems like the commercial itself, in terms of like the cinematography and some of the ideas in it, weren't necessarily bad. But as you can see in this screen capture image that I have here, they promoted the idea of having clam M&Ms. Now, if you are a connoisseur of M&Ms, then you might know that they have peanut M&Ms, they have almond M&Ms, they have M&Ms with kind of like a nougat on the inside, they have M&Ms with peanut butter on the inside. There's a lot of different types of M&Ms with different things on the inside, along with chocolate, and then they have the candy coating on the outside. And I assume that the idea of candy-coated clam bites is a joke. However, when your brand is based around a delicious snack that no one needs to eat, but that people enjoy eating, it's really not a good idea to promote a variation of your snack that most people would find absolutely revolting. Okay, now a lot of people don't like seafood. I do like seafood quite a bit, but even a lot of people who enjoy seafood are not especially fond of clams because they have a very unique taste. And personally, I don't mind clams. They're not my favorite type of seafood. But the idea of having a candy-coated clam bite or chocolate with clams is just absolutely disgusting. Putting that at the forefront of your commercial is just a terrible idea. And when you think about how much Super Bowl commercials cost and how many people are going to see them, it just doesn't make any sense to me why they would do this. This is certainly not the worst item on this list. It's actually, in my opinion, the least terrible fail of the three. And as I mentioned, I do think that there are aspects of this commercial that worked or that could have worked if it was in a different context. But ultimately, the idea did not work because of this, and also possibly partially because their audience was already upset over the removal of the spokes candies. So the lessons that we can take away from this digital marketing fail are, number one, listen to your audience. When they removed the spokes candies, people were very vocal about not being happy about that. And then to come out with this kind of gross type of commercial that is replacing the spokes candies with an actress who, while she is fairly popular, I'm sure she's very talented, that's not going to make the people who want the spokes candies back happy. And even if you don't focus on that aspect of the commercial, the idea of clam bites is just weird and gross. So the first lesson that we can take is listen to your audience and don't give them what they expressly say they don't want. And the second lesson we can take away is, while there's lots of room for creativity and humor in advertising, in fact, that can be very powerful, don't implement creativity and humor that can potentially make people not want to use your product. Okay, because again, M&Ms are a delicious snack that no one needs to eat, but that people like eating because it tastes good. So if you're going to make them think of M&Ms as something that might not taste good, that's not a good direction to go in. All right, next up, we have Shazam 2's massive box office flop. Now, the Shazam movies are not a franchise that I am especially familiar with. It is a storyline that comes from the DC universe. I believe it originated in DC Comics, which are like Batman is from the DC universe, Superman is from the DC universe. And I believe the first Shazam movie did fairly well, even though it was heavily criticized by people who are maybe more comic book movie purists. I think that it was largely targeted at a younger audience, and I think that it did a good job of pleasing that younger audience. And while you can debate as much as you want about the overall quality of the first movie, it was quite financially successful, which is why they made the second movie with a budget of approximately $125 million, which isn't insanely expensive compared to other superhero movies, like some of the biggest Marvel movies, some of the biggest DC movies. But it is still a very high price tag. And while there are different box office numbers out there, based on my research, Shazam 2 barely managed to earn more at its global theatrical box office than it cost in its budget. And the other thing you need to understand about movie budgets is that they often spend 50% to 100% of the movie budget, again, on marketing. So if this was $125 million budget for the film, they probably spent another 25, 50, 75, or 100 million on marketing. And that means that this film did not make back the money that they put into it, which to my understanding classifies it as a flop. And I have a quote down here from Zachary Levi, who plays Shazam. He's the protagonist, he's right here. And he said on Twitter, "I think the biggest issue we're having is marketing. This is a perfect family movie, and yet a lot of families aren't aware of that, which is just a shame." So right away, there's a very clear marketing message there. Now, they definitely put a lot of money into marketing. They made multiple trailers that were probably quite expensive, and they probably put them out on multiple different platforms, boosting them as ads on social media and other things like that. But if what Zachary Levi is saying here is true, and they didn't target the correct audience, if they didn't create trailers that were going to make it clear that this was an appropriate movie for children and attract children to want to come and see the film, then of course it's not going to be very successful. And while you might think, well, it's a comic book movie, of course it's for kids, that's actually not the case, because many comic book films, and in particular DC comic book films, are not appropriate for children. I would say probably the last 4 Batman films that have been made, the Nolan trilogy and the more recent film, The Batman, were all very dark and gritty and mature in their themes, probably not the kind of thing that you would want to take a kid to see. And I believe a lot of DC's other films, such as the Superman films and their Justice League, are also not especially appropriate for children. And I think there are other elements that contributed to this film being a flop as well. One of them is that, from what I've read, the upper management of the DC corporation have not been very happy with the direction the films are taking. And probably what they're more unhappy with is the lack of financial success for a lot of the films. And so what I've read is that they're planning on rebooting the DCEU, which is the DC Extended Universe. It's like the film universe that all of the DC comic book films take place in. And so if the marketing failed to attract new audiences, then they really needed to rely on their core audience, their existing audience, to buy tickets. But with them announcing that they're planning on rebooting the entire universe, a lot of those fans who might not have been super happy with some of the recent films are going to say, well, I've paid for a half dozen films in the past few years to watch all of your movies and support your business, and now you're just starting the story over again. That may have made certain people not want to buy a ticket. And, if they were going to go out to a movie with a group of friends, that might have caused them to choose something else or to not even suggest it, which ultimately could hurt them a lot. And another thing to take into consideration is that the superhero film industry has become quite saturated with films that have very high budgets and a lot of special effects, but do not have a very high quality of writing or necessarily performances or any of the other things that people really want from movies. Now, Zachary Levi is an excellent actor. I haven't seen him in a lot of things, but he was the star of a TV show that I used to really like. It's not on anymore. It's called Chuck. Pretty good TV show. It's like a spy story, but it's a comedy. And I like spy stories and I like comedies, so that worked well for me. And he was great in that. That was a while back, so he was significantly younger. But I'm sure he still has a similar level of talent and energy. And you can see that there are many young, probably very energetic performers in the cast. I think Lucy Liu was also in this, who is, of course, a very storied and talented actor herself. And so this film had a lot of potential, but I think that the fact that it is kind of just another generic, high-budget, special effect, saturated superhero movie in a world where superhero movies have been the vast majority of the big-budget films for the past decade or longer, it just doesn't have a lot of uniqueness or appeal to it. And when you combine that with the fact that they didn't necessarily market to the right people and they really didn't cater to their base, I think those factors came together to create a film that just didn't do enough to attract new people and did not do enough to attract their existing customers and make them want to really show up and support it. So the lesson here, so there's a few different lessons here that we can take away, but the primary one that I'm going to focus on is that you really do need to target your marketing correctly, because I'm sure that they had a massive marketing budget for this, and yet, according to Zachary Levi, they didn't do a great job of spending that marketing budget, and they probably could have done a much better job of marketing it, even with a much smaller budget, if they had just targeted the right people and made it clear that this was a great movie for kids. All right, and the final one, and the one that is, in my opinion, clearly the most disastrous marketing fail of 2023, is Bud Light's disastrous March Madness influencer ad. Now, there is a lot of political controversy surrounding this one, but I am not really interested in that, and I don't think that that's actually the main issue that caused this to be such a huge marketing fail. So to give you a little bit of background on this situation, March Madness refers to, I believe, a tournament for college basketball teams, which takes place in and around March. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't really follow professional or college sports other than combat sports like mixed martial arts, but even I am aware of what March Madness is and how some people get so excited about it. Some people really love their college sports, their college football, their college basketball, and it's a huge deal for a lot of people. And Bud Light this year decided that one of their primary influencer campaigns promoting their special March Madness sale would be this individual who's on the screen, who is a TikTok influencer with a massive audience and is also a transgender individual, and I think is fairly prominent in the transgender community on TikTok and elsewhere on the internet. And when I explain what Bud Light's plan here was, you may be absolutely dumbfounded because it makes absolutely no sense. As far as I can tell, Bud Light's plan with this was to pay probably a really significant amount of money for videos created by this individual and posted on their TikTok account, which have absolutely nothing to do with basketball, absolutely nothing to do with March Madness, and which kind of look down on people who are interested in basketball and March Madness and college sports. I don't think that I've seen all of the videos that this influencer did, and I don't think that I saw the entire videos, but I did see several clips, and March Madness barely even got mentioned. It started off with something like, oh, Bud Light wants me to promote them, and they sent me this can with my face on it, and it's such a great beer, and they said that I'm promoting something called March Madness. I don't even know what that is. Is it a sport? And then they just kind of continued talking about other stuff. And so I guess the idea of this campaign was to try to attract non-Bud Light customers to Bud Light. But you have to realize that at this point, Bud Light was and had been for many years the most popular beer in America. Okay, so it is guaranteed that some of the people who saw this ad, in fact, probably more than half of them, would be existing Bud Light customers who might be very interested in March Madness and college basketball, who would feel somewhat insulted by the idea that their favorite beer paid someone a ton of money to act like the sport that they care about is not important and is a joke. And so, like I said, there was a lot of political controversy around this, and I think that the Bud Light boycott was initiated by conservative and Republican influencers. And so they're kind of the ones that get the credit or the blame for that, however you want to look at it. But the truth is that political influencers on both sides of the political aisle are always starting boycotts on things. There's always marketing campaigns and products and influencers and just stuff that opposes their ideas that they don't like. And so they are constantly talking down about things and boycotting things, and it rarely has a big impact. But in this case, Bud Light has seen a massive dip in sales in the months since this campaign went out. They are no longer the number one beer, and they've had to lay off hundreds of workers and I believe shut down some factories because they've just seen such a massive decline in their sales. And again, I don't think that it has a lot to do with the Republicans or conservatives being upset about it. I think that it mostly has to do with the fact that this commercial was fairly insulting to the Bud Light base. But that's not all. It got a lot worse because this brought a lot of attention to Bud Light and to their marketing staff. And then it turned out that Bud Light's VP of marketing, who was ostensibly the person responsible for this campaign, had recently done a podcast interview in which this young VP of marketing said that she felt like Bud Light was a dying brand and that it was her job to revitalize this dying brand by teaching their existing customer base to be less fratty. And she used a couple other kind of insulting words to describe their existing customers that I'm not going to try and remember. Her opinion was basically that Bud Light is a failing brand, which it was not. It was the most popular beer in America and had been for quite a while. So her premise was wrong. And her solution for her imagined problem was also wrong because she thought that she was going to re-educate their existing customers and tell them what they should value instead of supporting what they do value, and also recruit a bunch of new customers who weren't interested in Bud Light in the first place. So once that interview of hers started getting clipped and going viral, that is when the problem really got bad. That's when the boycott started to kind of go mainstream. And then from what I've read, Bud Light just keeps making it worse because they have been very hesitant with apologizing or admitting any kind of fault in the campaigns that they created and also in the statements made by their VP of marketing. In fact, I've heard rumors that that VP of marketing was fired, but to my knowledge, Bud Light is denying that she was fired and saying that she's just on paid leave and that she took that leave by choice, which is basically like saying, we support the fact that our VP of marketing was insulting our customers and we agree with her. And in addition to the lack of apology and the lack of ownership of what they did, further upsetting the conservatives and Republicans and people who were already boycotting it, the fact that they didn't double down in support of this influencer and in support of the VP of marketing and in support of that entire movement actually upset the political left. So what you ended up with was you had people on the political right boycotting Bud Light because they didn't like this ad campaign. You had people on the political left boycotting Bud Light because they didn't think that Bud Light was doing enough to double down on this ad campaign. And you had Bud Light's main consumer base refusing to buy Bud Light because the VP of marketing straight up insulted them and said that they need to be someone who they're not. And so Bud Light sales are just in the toilet. As I mentioned, they've had to shut down factories and lay off workers. And in addition to all this empiric evidence that says that their sales are down and they're no longer the number one beer in America, there's also a lot of anecdotal evidence out there. You can find a lot of stories from bartenders and from bar owners who are saying that people who have always drank Bud Light when they come into the bar are now switching to a different brand. And so there's a number of lessons that we could take away from this blunder as well. But I think the most important one is that you can't be politically divisive, especially when you are selling a product that needs to apply to as many people as possible. If your business model is selling a product or a service that has a very high profit margin and you don't need to have a ton of customers and you only need to target very specific people who agree with your political ideology, then being politically divisive can work because it can help make you go viral, it can appeal to your customers, and you don't need everyone in a country or in the world to buy your product. You just need a certain number of people, which if you've done your audience research, you know that they exist. You just need them to buy your product, and if what you're doing in your marketing makes them happy, then that's going to work. But Bud Light is, first of all, is a product with a low profit margin, which in order to be profitable needs to sell a lot. It's a beer, so basically they want it to be appealing to everyone who drinks beer. And so by creating this politically divisive marketing campaign, they basically alienated half of their audience very, very quickly. And even worse than that, in my opinion, the biggest aspect of this was the VP of marketing doing a podcast where she straight up insulted most of their customer base. And the truth is that unless your brand is in some way tied to politics or tied to whatever movement you might be supporting or against, being politically divisive is just a bad idea. It's not your job as a brand to tell people what they should value, what they should think, what they should believe in, or even what they should spend their money on. It's not your job to tell them you need to buy our product in order to be a good person. It's your job to tell them you should want to buy our product because it's so great and because we value you as a customer and we're not going to try and tell you how to live your life. And Bud Light kind of did the opposite of that here. And that resulted in my opinion, the biggest digital marketing fail of 2023 so far. All right, let me know what you thought of this video. If this gets a lot of positive reaction, maybe I'll do another one of these at the end of the year and we'll make it a biannual thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.